roll of our council members. Council Member Moberg.
Here.
Council Member Molinar.
Here.
Council Member Beaton.
Here.
Council Member Hulst.
Here.
Council Member Hudson.
Here.
Council Member Carillas.
Here.
And Council Member Brucksmith.
Here.
All right, thank you. Under our consent agenda tonight, we have 3 items: the approval of the May 13 regular council meeting minutes, the approval of the May 20 payroll checks, and the approval of the May 27th claims.
I'd move approval of the consent agenda.
Second.
Thank you. Motion by Mark and a second by Aaron. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you very much. Under reports tonight is just our review of any emails that we received from the public. I am aware of one email that was received from Ms. Jane Halsey of Mount Vernon. So I'll go ahead and read that email, and then I'll ask if the council has any other public comment they received. This was dated May 25th, 2020. City Council members, I write to plea for a ban on personal fireworks within the city limits. I understand there may be barriers to the enforcement and prosecution of such an ordinance. However, I believe it is time to say enough of the noise, destruction, and litter caused by personal fireworks. In my neighborhood, Thunderbird East, the noise starts at least 2 weeks prior to July 4 and goes weeks afterward. The fireworks of which I find the most disturbing are not the colorful ones, but the extremely loud booms that are set off all hours of the day and night. However, even the colorful ones are loud and dangerous. Policing and prosecution are difficult. Maybe it's time to forbid the sale and or possession of personal fireworks within the city limits. I hereby gladly volunteer to help research and draft an ordinance to address this issue. I have read, for example, that Seattle's ordinance includes the following wording, quote, possession, manufacture, storage, sale, handling, and use of fireworks are prohibited. Please take action on behalf of the majority of folks who do not engage in setting off personal fireworks and find them a major disturbance. Thank you, Jane Halsey of Mount Vernon. All right, is council aware of any other public comment that came to the email listed on the agenda? Okay, I didn't receive any others, so we'll go ahead and move on. Item under our new business, item A is a Mount Vernon business update. And we've got a few guests joining us tonight. So Peter Donovan will introduce these guests and give them some time to give you an update. Peter.
Thanks, Mayor. Good evening, Council. The City of Mount Vernon has been allocated federal funding for the purpose of responding to the COVID-19 crisis. And a portion of this funding has been designated for small business grants. Now, additional COVID relief funding is expected to become available to our community in the weeks ahead. And in consideration of how that funding will be channeled, it's going to be subject to council's ability to obtain the most current climate and sort of up-to-date happenings within our business community. So council, prior to bringing these future decisions on COVID relief funding allocations before you, staff thought it would be beneficial for you to be updated by some experts in the field. Tonight we have with us Ms. Ellen Gamson, the Executive Director of the Mount Vernon Downtown Association, and Mr. Andy Mayer, the CEO of our Mount Vernon Chamber of Commerce. And the two of them are going to brief council for a few minutes, and then we'll open things up for council questions in this effort to help guide you through all of this oversight of these COVID relief emergency funds. So Ellen and Andy, welcome.
Thank you very much. I believe I have volunteered to go first, and I'm going to give you a general idea of what the businesses are going through, what they're thinking, how they're trying to get out of this situation, just so that you can really get a good idea of the impact that the crisis has had on them. The first thing is that virtually all businesses in Mount Vernon have been impacted. And if they haven't been immediately, they likely will be down the road. Yeah, there's some that maybe had a burst of business, like the banks in helping out with the government programs, or maybe mortgage companies are busy temporarily because rates are low. But literally every business has been impacted and will be impacted. And you won't necessarily know it because business owners are a proud bunch. And, there are a lot of business owners and managers on the council. So you know how it is. I mean, you're not gonna announce your problems, but businesses are really hurting, and you're not gonna know it, at least not immediately. Just for some context, think of where we were just 3 months ago. Parking was an issue. You remember that? And businesses were really looking forward to the positive impact that was coming from the Tulip Festival. How things have changed. So, businesses are struggling. Bear with me on this next kind of analogy, or that's probably the wrong term, but literally they are dealing with 5 stages of grief. The first one is denial. Hey, it's no big deal. And that's the way they were thinking initially, along with the rest of us. Next one's anger. That's pretty clear. I've talked to a lot of businesses that were really excited about this year because they invested heavily and appropriately because business was good and they really wanted to ramp it up this year. Well, that's turned into a really tough deal for obvious reasons to have extended themselves and then hit the brakes as fully as we have. Bargaining is the other one. What could I have done differently, or if only I could have, or what could I have done more of? I guess the only other thing that's a little different here is that all along we've heard a lot of people talk about what can they do now for others, and that's an amazing thing. But depression is a stage of grief, and it's pretty obvious. These businesses, and I know you know this, but they've invested their money, their livelihood, their life savings, and it is in jeopardy. So depression is real. I bet you've talked to some people, whether they are business owners or just individuals that are dealing with that. Acceptance is the last part of dealing with grief, and we're not there yet because we're not to a place where, I guess we can accept the crisis, businesses, but we're not through it. So it's a little tough to have acceptance. I'm going to add to the list, and I guess this isn't part of the stages of grief because, it's uncertainty. And when you're dealing with grief, there's one major certainty, but here we're dealing with so much uncertainty still. Businesses struggled immediately. They just don't, and obviously some more than others, but they just don't have the resources to suddenly go to be just going along and then suddenly have no income for an extended period of time. They just don't have that. About the various government assistance programs, the payroll protection program, the PPP, and the EIDL grants and loans. Those definitely have helped. Some businesses would have already been out of business except for those programs, but still there's a great deal of uncertainty, like with the PPP, and Ellen can talk more about individuals specifically that are dealing with this, but it was a bit of a lifeline or a raft in a flood, but it doesn't last too long. And then of course the unemployment insurance helped out individuals, and then that helped businesses because a lot of businesses had to lay off people. Of course, the unemployment insurance has been difficult as well, although somebody made a claim on my behalf, which was really nice of them. Somebody from Nigeria, evidently. So businesses really do want to get back to work, and most seem to understand what they have to do to reopen safely. They do seem to know where they can get their guidelines from the governor's office. and from various associations that seem to be the leaders in offering up guidelines for different industries such as hospitality or construction or whatever it might be. So they're ready to reopen, but the implementation is likely to be a mixed bag. They know their income will be reduced while some of their expenses are greater, providing the equipment that they need to open safely, et cetera, or a restaurant that can only have half their tables for a while, they're just not going to get the same income. And they're wondering whether their customers will come back and how quickly. They know they won't all come back right away. And something I really want to stress is that businesses hope that they'll have jobs for their employees because there really won't be as many. But I don't know if everyone understands that businesses really care about their employees. Sometimes when businesses are getting going, they pay their staff when they're not paying themselves because their reward is thought or meant to be down the road. And in this case, the road, I don't know, the road didn't end, but it sure does have a major pothole in it. So, I mean, they really do care about their employees. So in summary, all businesses are impacted. Yes, some more than others, but some won't make it, which will lead to a loss of jobs and tax revenue, of course. Any financial assistance that you can do through the various programs that you mentioned it's certainly needed and would be very much appreciated. And I guess the last thought is this really is going to take a while for businesses and for all of us to get through. So we need to be patient. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Any questions for Andy before we move on? Okay. And Ellen, thank you so much. Go ahead.
Yeah, no worries. I think I'm having to strike a lot of my notes here because Andy stole it all. But I'm probably going to say a few things that you all are very well aware of. And we're all living in the world that we're in, and so pardon me, and please don't feel patronized if I say stuff that you're already fully aware of, but just to kind of encapsulate this, obviously many downtown businesses have been completely closed for 10 weeks or more under the governor's orders. Most of the businesses that have been able to be open with modified operations, some of our essential retailers and our restaurants with takeout and delivery, with the possible exception of our grocers, the Mount Vernon Red Apple and the Skagit Valley Food Co-op, are experiencing severely reduced revenues. So certainly there's 100% reduction for the folks that are closed altogether. But what I'm hearing from just the surveys is that on average, they're realizing about somewhere between 20 and 30% of what their normal revenues would be at this time. And that includes restaurants. And so meanwhile, their fixed costs like rent and insurance and utilities and all of those other things and inventory accounts and those types of things, those continue to accrue and remain pretty constant. I have not heard of very many landlords or property owners who have been able or willing to offer reductions or forgiveness of rent. So that some of those fixed overhead costs, in most instances where there has been some leeway given, it is a deferral, not forgiveness or a permanent reduction. And so many businesses are aware of only being offered the opportunity to have a balloon payment hit them at a point in the future when they are really uncertain about when the revenue stream is going to return to anything approaching, what could have been expected prior to this pandemic. And again, there's no end in sight, right? So so those fixed costs continue to accrue. You know, in recent weeks, a few of the businesses are reporting back that they have been successful in finally accessing some of the federal relief, you know, the EIDL funds and the PPP funds. But, you know, even those come entailed with like a constantly shifting landscape of changing requirements and regulations. They're fraught with enough uncertainty about what amounts will be forgivable and what expenses are actually permissible or eligible, that many of them are afraid to use those funds, or fearful of incurring additional debt at a time when they just really don't know when they'll be able to meet that obligation, and when their businesses will be able to support repayment. You know, and as Andy mentioned, they are additionally faced with increased out-of-pocket expenses. The cost of doing business has gone up because of the required purchases of equipment and supplies, and at the same time that their revenue has disappeared or severely curtailed. So, you know, we've been asking all along periodically, you know, what do you need? What do you need? And the number one answer has been and will, I'm sure, continue to be that the thing they need most is capital for operating expenses, and that is not restricted to limited use like payroll, mortgage, and utilities. There are very real costs of doing business that are not optional, that are part of what would be considered overhead. And of course, those are unique to different industries and businesses, but it's more than rent, it's more than utilities, and it's certainly more than payroll. So, you know, when it comes to looking at additional federal funding that becomes available for the city to help businesses access, you know, that would be their primary use for it. Then I, of course, have a few more suggestions that were offered with regard to what more they would ask of the city outside of financial assistance, and particularly if there's any kind of relief that comes to the city and the municipalities for your own financial constraints that are brought about by the current situation we find ourselves in. I'm not sure if you'd like me to share those or not, but I did receive them when I solicited input from my businesses.
You could certainly feel free to share that, Ellen.
Okay, you know, if for no other reason, because you know, as you're all fully aware, people want to be heard, and the volume of response I got when I solicited input, I think it'll be helpful for me just to be able to report back. Okay, I shared these concerns, so bear with me. I did make notes so I wouldn't misspeak or miss something. So here's a quote. It's kind of combined from several people. One real concern is that the release of people from the jails has increased the number of issues we're facing in the downtown around our building, and increased the number of uncomfortable and unsafe feeling interactions with our staff and customers. There's more begging, garbage, and vandalism, and the alleys are being used as bathrooms. We need an increased sense of security and higher visibility of police presence downtown in order for our employees and our customers to feel safe returning to our businesses. Our restaurants are requesting that increased outdoor seating be available and permitted in all public spaces, such as the Riverwalk Plaza, the Pine Square, and at the Jasper Gates Parklet. Retailers, restaurants, and downtown residential occupants have all request that the public restrooms be opened again to prevent the public health hazards of people relieving themselves on the sidewalks, alleys, doorways, and in other public areas. And then finally, as we move into phase 2 and beyond, most businesses reporting that they plan to require masks before allowing customers to enter their spaces. It has been suggested that local authorities should mandate the use of face masks in businesses so that individual businesses would not be vilified for following recommended health guidelines. The city should consider ordering that face coverings in indoor retail environments are required not optional. And those are the top 5, if you count the money.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that too, Ellen. Any questions or comments from our city council members?
Yes, I would like to share something like Ellen was talking about, you know, we have I have seen people reject to wear masks in public, but there is something is going on. We see people go to Costco. They know when they go to Costco, they have to wear a mask. Nobody can come into Costco without mask. Why not the same people can wear masks somewhere else? They do it at Costco because it's mandatory to come in with mask. Then that's my only question, how we can enforce people wearing masks. Because my message when I see somebody, I said, I wear my mask because I care about you. If you care about me, you need to wear a mask. That's the only three good things we have to practice in this time of pandemic. You wash your hands with soap and water is easy. Social distance and wear your mask. Anybody can do that. But I have seen people, you know, people are completely, it's like nothing happened. Just yesterday by the Kulshan and La Venture, I saw a gathering older people with children with no mask at all and no social distance. And what I can see is doing our work, doing our job, encouraging people and passing the message, what is going on in the community. But at the same time, we see other people, they don't care. And I don't know what we can do as authorities in the community. And because, you know, this is really happening. It's really happening. It's not a joke. It's happening. I have seen people sick and I have seen people dying in COVID.
Any other comments or questions from city council members?
I'd like to weigh in. Can you hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Yes.
First of all, thank you, Ellen and Andy, for the updates and working with the businesses. Obviously really important to get things coming back to some normal, whether that's a new normal for a while. We'll see how that goes. It certainly seems that we need to encourage the use of PPE to make downtown and the rest of our businesses in the city comfortable for people, because we can have all the regulations, you know, that we want, but until people are comfortable, they're not going to be out, you know, doing commerce, the business of commerce as they need. So we really do encourage everybody to follow those rules or the recommendations that Iris mentioned. And it seems that we ought to be working in places like downtown to really reinforce that, make places easy for customers to drive in, pick up, do curbside pickups, to know that they can go into these businesses, be safe, to find places for the restaurants, which are going to be under 50% density rules, you know, to have additional seating outside. And so I hope the city can work with all the business owners to find those creative solutions to streamline getting some of these solutions in place.
I'd like to also add, and it's a failure on my part to thank the city staff, Peter and Mayor Jill have both been very receptive. For example, we are in the process of planning to reserve in each block a single street side space on South First Street between Division and Kincaid for pickup and delivery designated. That's we've got the signage under development, and we're just, we hope that we'll have it all in place so that the minute phase 2 says go and we have people coming down to take advantage of that, we'll have those spaces reserved. And there was no hesitation at all when we asked for that. I think with regard to the masks, Richard, I appreciate, you know, it is important to encourage people. And I would think that I'm seeing both, you know, Mayor Jill's messages and her videos, and certainly the county has been in their publications certainly strongly promoting the use of facial coverings. But I think, in fact, what a couple of my businesses specifically are really asking is to have there be a they. Sorry, you got to wear a mask. They say you have to, mandate it, not just promote and encourage, but in fact mandate it. And I will say, maybe not all of my businesses feel this way, but a couple of them took the time to write me rather lengthy. And you'll see that a few businesses are deeply enough concerned that they are, I'm seeing a couple of them saying they're not going to necessarily feel comfortable reopening, even when it's permitted, because of what they're seeing with regard to public disregard for those recommendations. So recommendations and guidelines don't seem to be hitting home hard enough with enough people for some folks to feel safe, even opening their businesses and asking their staff to work. Not everybody feels that way, but a couple of really significant businesses in my downtown.
I did want to ask, Ellen, I was going to ask you that question. Are there some businesses that aren't that worried about the mask thing? I'm just kind of curious. Or is it pretty much across the board?
The ones that are weighing in are concerned.
Yes.
I could speculate about just based on, my history of knowledge of people and their, personal leanings maybe, but I haven't had a business say to me, I'm not worried.
Okay.
If those businesses aren't talking to me.
Gotcha. I would almost like to see the county mandate it. And the reason being is that we're such a small county. If we did it in Mount Vernon, the people that didn't want to do it would just go to, say, Burlington or Cedar-Woolley. If they're not following the same model, I think we all need to follow the same model. I personally don't have a problem. Myself personally, I don't know what the legal ramifications, I would defer to the city attorney on that, but I think masks, I get irritated when people don't wear masks because I feel it's important. It's my duty to protect others. But I get funny looks from people. I was shopping at a nursery the other day, picking up some plants for Memorial Day, and people come waltzing in with no mask, and they almost look at you like, what are you doing? You're following the masses or whatever. And personally, it's my decision to wear a mask. I feel safer myself, and I feel like I'm being a good citizen to other people. But like I said, I would prefer that the county did it as an overall blanket for the whole county.
I can understand that. And don't misunderstand me either. All of the businesses are desperate to reopen. They're just also, many of them are also very concerned. There's clearly a tension, as we've seen all along, between health, physical and, health and economic well-being. It's a very delicate balance.
I can speak to that as one who operates a downtown business that invites the public to drop in. We are planning on requiring that they wear masks. We'll have some for them if they don't. It's definitely going to be awkward. There's no doubt about it. So it really would be helpful if we could say they, whoever it is, whether it's the city or county, require it. Our sign will tell them that, but it'll say that we're requiring them, but something to the effect that to help protect are more vulnerable, something to just underscore the fact that that's why we're doing this, which is of course what everybody's saying. But yeah, it's our intention to do that. And I know it's going to be, some aren't going to like it.
Any other council member comments? I think in talking through the face covering issue, I will say it's impossible to enforce. There is just absolutely no way that we would criminalize that and have our police, want to give tickets and all of that. And it's not that I don't feel as strongly that we should have some personal responsibility in protecting other people. But I just feel like it would be impossible to enforce, and the expectation would be that our police would be out there. So I would just throw that out there. I can appreciate the request, but I would have a really hard time asking staff to do that, knowing that it would be impossible for them to be successful doing it. So doesn't mean that we can't.
I hear you. I understand that. I
encourage,
don't
right?
expect our police officers to out be putting people, you know, hauling them off for not wearing a mask. And I understand what you're saying. I do. It's the same concept of other things that we've talked about before as a council. So I just find it irritating, personally irritating, and that's just my personal view.
Yeah, but again, I am really scary. I am really afraid when I go out and I see people don't wear a mask, and sometimes probably I look paranoid when I see somebody close to me and I just stand up with my hand, and because it's so easy to get infected. It takes just 1 second. That's what I have seen. I just saw a pregnant woman in Burlington. She never went out. Her husband did everything, laundry, going to the store for everything, and she was pregnant and she didn't go anywhere. And guess what? She went to Seattle to deliver the baby, and the baby was okay. And when she was tested, and she's a young girl, 23 years old, she was positive. And even now they are still dealing in Burlington. She's completely isolated. The baby, someone else is taking care of the baby, and nobody knows how she got infected because she never went out. She was just in the house, probably in the taxi, probably in the clinic, probably somewhere when she took maybe ultrasound or something. Nobody knows how she got infected. Her husband is completely clean, or maybe I don't know. Then to see those kind of things is scary. And if we've seen models in other countries like Honduras, where I am from, it is a third world country. Everyone there wears a mask. Nobody can go on the street without mask. And even though people, they're going out just once a week, and if somebody gets somebody on the street walking without mask, they get arrested. Then I don't see why here we cannot enforce this practice. We have so many young people here, and we have elderly also. Then my scary thought is the next phase in summer or fall, when it's going to be worse. We just see it. We just see what happened, what is going on in Yakima. It's a lot of people already infected in Yakima. And we are in rural area here. We live in agriculture zone. What is going to happen when the season is open or is already there? That is my scary thought. And I avoid to go places that is multitude. I don't go. I went to the doctor office this afternoon, and 3 people in the room, and everybody were wearing masks and social distance. I am really scary. I am probably too paranoid, but I have seen it. I have seen the virus on my face. People who had it and people have died. I don't know. That's just my. I don't know.
Thank you, Irish, for sharing. I think we all have things that we want to be concerned about. So we don't want to discount your feelings about it. So I will say, just to kind of wrap this up, Ellen and Andy, if there are businesses that are looking for outside seating, if they could, give a call to the city, because we do have some permitting for sidewalk use and things like that. I think we need to be very careful about the intended use of adding more and more seating and places to sit. And that would be the unintended consequences of behavior you described at the very first part of what they were concerned about with security. So we want to do it right. We want to do it where it can be monitored really well. It can be kind of enforced, by the business that's utilizing that ability. So, but we're happy whenever anyone's ready to start talking with them about that. Okay.
Mayor, do you mind speaking to the bathrooms question for the public?
Right. So we, the Parks Department is in charge of public restroom. We had closed the restrooms at a certain point simply because we couldn't keep up with what we felt would be proper sanitation and cleaning. And so we did have a few that are open on a very limited basis. We wanted to try it out. So Lions Park has some limited hours, and then the restrooms up at Hillcrest Park, I think, are the other. We were going to try it. I know that we're opening them for the farmers market and things like that, but we can absolutely look at getting that open in our downtown. What we've been using is a private company to help augment staff since we didn't hire any seasonals this year. And that funding can be reimbursed through our federal CARES funding that we received at the city. So we can absolutely take a look at doing that on the plaza. And we can.
Some of the restaurants that are doing takeout and delivery that, for example, District Brewing, they're very concerned. They know that they're adding to the volume of traffic and folks using the plaza, which is lovely, but they're not allowed under this current phase to give people access to their space to use the restrooms. So they're creating, in some ways, a demand and yet unable to meet that need legally and safely. And so.
Absolutely. It's something we can take a look at. I'll talk with Jennifer, our Parks Enrichment Director, tomorrow and see about adding that on the list. Kind of one of those things that as we have more and more traffic, we're able to open that back up. So thank you for letting us know.
May I interject that when the chamber opens the visitor center, which may be Tuesday, we will open the public restroom. And yes, that does carry some additional responsibilities to keep it clean, et cetera. But I have seen, I don't know, I suppose articles, not studies, but articles that suggest that people's willingness to return to shop will be directly in proportion to their knowing that they will be able to go to the bathroom somewhere when they are out shopping. So it is essential. So, would we like to not do it? Yeah, we would like to not open them, but we are going to do so.
Well, definitely with phase 2, hopefully right around the corner, it just makes sense.
Yeah. I've got my fingers crossed on that.
Okay, great. All right, thank you again, Andy and Ellen, for joining us tonight to give an update for council. We'll go ahead and move to our next. We'll go to move to our next agenda item. I'm looking to make sure all the faces are okay with that. All right, thank you. Item B tonight, it's a street closure request from our fire department for training. And I think Chief Bryce is here, that unless Peter was introducing it.
I'm going to introduce this one.
Okay.
And if there are any questions, of course, Chief Bryce can answer those.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you, Mayor. And Council, the Mount Vernon Fire Department is always looking for opportunities to stay current on its firefighting practices and to train kind of in the most realistic settings. The state's phase 1 stay-at-home orders have sort of led to a unique opportunity to train on one of the city's more distinctive structures and to do it without much impact or interruption to traffic or business in the surrounding area, sort of because of the orders that are in place right now. So they've sort of made lemonade out of lemons, and they've identified a time, a date, and a location that provides the least amount of disturbance to the general public while yielding the most benefit for sharpening their firefighting skills. The training is for ladder truck operation, and it would take place early this Saturday morning at the President Hotel on First Street. A ladder truck, of course, is crucial for accessing our tall downtown buildings. And I know council is working on a plan to finally have a downtown fire station that actually houses one of these trucks. But until then, the department's going to drive them all the way across town for their training and also for emergencies. But for this Saturday, staff is recommending council approval closure request for the Mount Vernon Fire Department on Saturday morning, May 30th, from 6:30 a.m. to 9:30 a.m. And the closure would affect one block of Myrtle Street between 1st and 2nd Streets.
Okay, Chief Bryce, is there anything else you want to add to that?
No, the other thing I'd add to that is we've also invited the city of Burlington. They have a new ladder truck that they purchased probably 6 to 8 months ago. Well, they purchased it longer ago, but they got it back into service 6 to 8 months ago to do a little more joint training. Because when we have an operation like down at the President's Hotel, we want everybody to get an opportunity to get that training and the experience that they might not get at their own local jurisdiction. So just trying to be more regional in our approach.
Okay. Any questions for Chief Bryce on this particular item?
I'm just wondering if we obviously have contacted any of the businesses in that area to let them know what's going on.
I don't know that we've contacted any of the businesses. We've contacted obviously the President's Hotel. The street closure is going to serve as that notice for that. Again, that's why we're trying to take advantage of the early morning operations before anything would really be open. It's going to be painfully obvious of the training activity that's going on. We can create some signs too that say training operation, just to kind of help if people drive by, they'll see that as well.
I think it's a great opportunity. You might as well take it while you can. I think it's a good idea. I'd move for approval of the street closure request.
Second.
Motion by Mary and a second by Gary. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you. Item C tonight is the approval of the Skagit County Multi-Jurisdiction Hazard Mitigation Plan update. And that would be Chief Bryce is here for that particular item. Chief Bryce.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. So I apologize for looking off screen as I do this, as I read my notes from my computer over here. So starting back last year in May, the Skagit County, through the Department of Emergency Management, contracted with a consulting firm to help us update the Skagit County Hazard Mitigation Plan, of which the City of Mount Vernon is a partner with that, and we provide an annex to that plan, along with the other jurisdictions within the county, the cities and towns as well, along with our tribal partners. So by way of background, kind of the hazard mitigation works to reduce the loss of life and property by reducing the impacts of disasters. Through an effective mitigation planning and implementation strategies, it kind of helps reduce some of those natural hazards that could be in place and those risks. And we identify some of the vulnerabilities from that. Through planning, we develop some other strategies that are incorporated into that planning document as well. And then periodically, we're required through FEMA to provide an update to that. So an example is this is about 6 years since our last one. 2014 was the last dated document on that. Prior to that, it was 2008. And so we've just built off of those existing documents and done the required updates. The impacts to the city with regard to this impact our ability to receive some grant funding for some projects. An example of that would be the flood wall that was put in. If we didn't have an existing plan in place, FEMA could look at that and say, no, you don't meet the requirements, therefore they're not going to allow those grants. So again, by having this, it positions us for those future grant opportunities as we move forward. It also helps identify some of those larger projects within the city, identifies in a table matrix who would be responsible for that, where some of those funding mechanisms would be. If you look at the plan, it is a large document. It's very, has a lot of parts to that. The majority of that is why we partner with Skagit County for that. If we didn't, then we would be responsible for developing that whole entire plan. But by partnering with them, we provide just that annex piece of that, which reduces our work effort down to about 27 to 30 pages to provide the needed information and augment the county's response plan, or not the response plan, planning document for hazard and mitigations. Again, we started this back in May. During that process, we had several stakeholder meetings that were held by all those involved. We talked through the components that were there. We were led by the consultants to provide information and updates and review of existing documents that we have. Just some of this here. And then in September through October of this last year, then we updated that plan. We put out a draft of that plan. We had that reviewed by the stakeholders as a whole. And once they finished that up in December, then that plan went out for large public comment and review. That set out in public comment from January through the end of April. Now it's being brought forward for the cities and towns and tribes to provide a resolution accepting the plan and therefore creating the plan on behalf of the city. We send that resolution then off to FEMA where they adopt that, and then it starts the clock for the renewal process for the next 5 to 6 years to renew that plan. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions I can, and I hope I covered the topic well.
Okay, any questions for Chief Bryce on this particular item? I think it's our first item that has a resolution or ordinance number. So that would be resolution number 975.
I'll move for
Mayor,
approval. I'm 975. Sorry, did I step on somebody?
I was going to ask a question, but I'm happy to second. I'm curious if it would make sense to have a presentation of the city's hazard mitigation plan when things are a little bit back to normal. If we could have a work session or an on-camera review of some of the details therein, the pieces, just for general public information as well. I know I had access to 700 pages and the chief answered my questions in advance. So I'm happy to approve it. I'm just thinking about sharing information and keeping information flowing.
Councilmember, what I would recommend is when we get a little break from some of the COVID, we invite DEM, who is the major contributor to this plan, and I think have a lot more information on this as well. And then we can put a joint presentation together at one of our future public safety meetings to kind of go over the plan and the details that obviously DEM will have great information from to help us articulate those points if that meets your needs.
I think that's a great idea. It is Skagit County's overall plan, and we're just one of the components. So to have a joint presentation to me makes a lot of sense. So we can put that on the list for when we have a little more normalcy. Okay, great. So there is a motion and a second. Any other questions? All right, all those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you. And then for the notes, when our clerks are going to doing it, we're going to notice that Councilmember Molinar dropped off. I do know that Peter is talking to him right now to get him back on. So we'll hopefully see Gary back in just a minute. But thank you for that. Next up is item D. It's the ratification of emergency executive orders, and our city attorney, Kevin, will present that item. Kevin?
Thank you, Mayor and members of City Council. You have one executive order to ratify at your pleasure for this council meeting, and that would be Order 2020-007. Staff is requesting that you ratify this in the form of a written resolution, simply because that's what the ordinance requires. All the previous orders were ones ratified by simple motion. However, when the mayor enters into contracts through the emergency powers, the ordinance requires that that is ratified through written resolution. So before you tonight is resolution number 976, and the contract in which the mayor had entered into was a professional services agreement with Community Action to commit $30,000 of pass-through funding, federal funding, to your unsheltered persons so they can continue availing themselves of the motel voucher program.
So this would also be a resolution to be resolution 976. Do have a quick update on that as well. We ran into a little bit of a stumbling block with the hotel voucher program. Folks, the funding had run out, and most everyone had then vacated the hotel rooms except for about 3 different rooms. This is where our police department was called to remove people from those rooms. And then it fell into, Gary's coming back on board. So let me click on that real quick here. We want to wait just a minute. Let's get Gary back. All right, Gary, can you hear us?
Yep.
Okay, we'll just go ahead and wait for your video if you can get that. If not, it's okay. We can still hear you. So, okay.
Sounds good.
All right, so we're talking about the ratification of the executive order regarding a contract for entering into community action. So unfortunately, the way that their eviction laws are and governor's orders during this time is when folks stay more than, and Kevin's going to correct me if I'm wrong on this, 10 to 14 days, it establishes a residency issue, which means there's an eviction, not just removal from the property. And so these folks would fall under, we don't have the ability to evict during the pandemic. pandemic. So it's just causing some issues for the hotels themselves on even being willing to accept vouchers, knowing that this could happen. Kevin, our attorney, has taken the lead to get some clarification through the Attorney General's office, and then we'll share it with Skagit County Public Health before we, utilize this particular service. It could be around parameters where there's a limited stay, so that it would avoid a tenancy. But we're still working out the details. So I just wanted the council to know that. I still think it's a great idea and a great program and a contract we'd like to enter into, but it hasn't been enacted yet. So any questions on that? Okay, so this would be resolution 976 if you are interested in voting on that.
Actually, for some reason I couldn't get my microphone to come on, but we are,
okay.
I believe, on now. So a couple of weeks ago, we had discussed the CARES money that was going to be coming in, and we'd had a discussion about doing the committee meeting so we could talk about budgeting of those dollars that are coming in, because they're new dollars. They're not in our current budget. We haven't even, as a council, adopted to accept those dollars coming in. So I have a little bit of a problem because this feels like it's a little bit circumventing council as far as our financial responsibility. Not saying that the program's a bad program, but in principle, council has a fiscal responsibility to the city, and our number one role is the fiscal well-being of the city. Part of that is when monies come in, we allocate those monies out. We haven't had that opportunity to do so, and I'm having a little bit of a problem approving this from the standpoint that we haven't gone through the proper channels.
This is the proper channel, Councilmember Holston. In an emergency, your code provides a different procedure, and it grants the executive the ability to commit funds prior to budget approval. The check of the balance is a couple of things. One is that at the first available council meeting, it has to be ratified by the council, or else the contract's not going to be binding. And it further gives you in the resolution the ability to do so prior to making a budget action. That's written in your Mount Vernon Municipal Code.
I understand that, Kevin. I guess my problem is that 2 weeks ago, we knew these dollars were coming in. We asked for a committee meeting so we could have a discussion on how those dollars were going to be allocated. That hasn't happened, and now we've got a resolution before us to spend $30,000 of those monies. Why couldn't we have the committee meeting?
Well, we have this meeting, so we can certainly put this aside, because that's in our updated topic, is going through a lot of that detail. So that's totally fine. We felt at the time that we wanted to get this money allocated so we could get people housed in the situation where they were out on the street. So that's why we had prepared and worked with community action to get it on. But it's absolutely, of course, up to council, and we can certainly set it aside if that's what you'd like to do.
Like I said, I don't doubt the intent and the well-meaning behind the expenditure. My concern is the process. When council's asked to have that discussion, we've gone now 2 weeks without that discussion. This resolution looks like it was drawn up about a week ago, so there was some time for council to have a committee meeting, have those discussions, and I'm just objecting or expressing my objection to the process.
I really am unsure which direction we should be going at this point. It sounds like Kevin says this is the right process to do it. I understand where Mark's coming from, but I think we all know that this is a need in our city. So I don't know what to say to that. I really need guidance.
So when an emergency is declared by the mayor, it's done through the police powers of the city of Mount Vernon. You're a code city, and you have the full grant of police powers that aren't preempted by the state. And your ability to exercise that is set forth in your municipal code, chapter 240. And by granting or ratifying an emergency declaration, you provide the executive the ability to move swiftly and timely when there is a need to address emergencies or disasters, and that includes providing emergency assistance, so you don't have to wait for city council approval. The check is you approve it as soon as practical at your next council meeting. That's written in the black letter ordinance under chapter 240-100. The orders that you've seen to date include addressing the pandemic by closure of public services or restrictions of public services. This one is to provide emergency sheltering to your vulnerable population. It can take immediate effect, and then it's ratified at the next council meeting. One of the issues that we're trying to navigate here, quite frankly, is your ability to convene under the Open Public Meetings Act is severely restricted. And it has to be either necessary and routine, or it has to be necessary to address the COVID-19. Now, certainly the longer that proclamation that suspends your ability to meet and do their normal course of business is in effect, the more you're going to have to address issues, or else you're going to be harmed by it. But, and there's no real concrete guidance of how you define those parameters. The good news is that that proclamation, unless it's continued, will expire at the end of this month. And they'll probably take both a governor action and a legislative action to continue it in some fashion. But if you were to violate that, then there would be consequences. So in my opinion, the contract has gone through your code appropriately. This is the next council meeting to seek approval of the professional services agreement. Certainly, if you don't, you can, that's a policy decision of the city council, and you could wait to do so.
I think what would solve this is if we just passed over item D and went to item E, because that's where it's what we've had reserved for our pandemic response and discussion. And that's where we'll have an update from Doug on the financing piece, which covers just the acceptance of the CARES funding, update from our fire chief and our police chief, and from me on what we've been doing around the response. So that might solve this. We did not schedule a committee meeting simply because I guess I thought that having the for the good of the order discussion was what we did. That's what we were talking about, all the financing. We've been presenting memos during that time. So why don't we just go to item E, and then if you'd like to come back to D and take action tonight, great. If not, then we'll wait until we have a meeting. If we can do it next week, we're leaning forward to try and do a public safety committee next week as well, depending on the orders. So it's up to council and what you're most comfortable with.
I'm good with that suggestion, going on to E, and then we can come back to D, or do we need to do something to do that correctly? Is that okay?
We can just set that aside for the moment.
Okay.
Yeah, I just don't, I want to make it clear that there is no trying to circumvent council on this. And so I'm a little bit thrown by that. That's why we, in our meetings, we've had the discussions and gone over all of the memos. So I just don't want council to think that I'm doing something that's not above board.
I'm happy to make a motion to approve the ratification of emergency executive orders now or later. I certainly want to come back to it, but I can hold and wait, come back to it. So I think Mark's got some points I want to address as well, but.
Okay, why don't we just move on to discussion and then we can come back if we'd like. I think that'd be most comfortable for everybody. Okay, great. All right, moving on then to our just open discussion around what we've been doing. Doug, would you like to go first, and then I'll put your slides up?
I would love to.
Okay, let me share the screen. Okay.
All right. Good evening, council members. So what I wanted to talk to, there's a few things that we brought up throughout this COVID things that I wanted to talk about some of the funding things. And the first one that I wanted to discuss is the one we were just discussing, the coronavirus relief funds. I wanted to talk a little bit about the process and the next steps for this receiving these relief funds. So first of all, we did receive an award letter. The award letter we received about a week ago on the 20th, and it was for the $1,072,200. From there, we received a number of working papers that needed to be completed, and it was just basically asking for basic information so they could put together a contract. This is from the Department of Commerce, so they can put together a contract for us. Once we receive that contract, it will come in front of council for approval, and we can have those discussions on what's all going to be included in that. The next stage would be the reimbursements, and the reimbursements, first of all, this is it's a reimbursement style grant, so we have to use their grant system. So we'll need to make sure that we get up it's going to take some time to get the system set up, make sure we have all the rules and responsibilities and security stuff set up. But once that is done, then we can start submitting reimbursements. The dates for these reimbursements are anything from March 1st of 2002 through October 31st, 2020. And then we can not submit anything later than November 15th of 2020. And then the next step is just basically how we do that. And this is through the A19 certification and activity report. In order to receive any reimbursements for these eligible expenses incurred, each A19 voucher must include a certification and an activity report. So the mayor must certify by signing this document, certifying that they are eligible expenses. And then there has to be an activity report, which basically just is an Excel detailed report of all the expenditures that we have. And if there's any questions to that, I'll just move on to the next slide to talk about the eligible costs. Part of the thing when we received the award was a lot of information came forward for us to be able to look at exactly what's going to be included. There's a lot more detail than what I'm going to give you here. But basically, they do have an eligible cost test. And if all the responses for the particular incurred cost are true for all the 5 statements down below, then a jurisdiction, we can feel confident that those costs are eligible. So first, the expenses connected to the COVID-19 emergency. Is the expenses necessary? The expenses not filling a shortfall in government revenues. The expenses not funded through another budgeted line item, allotted or allocation as of March 27th of 2020. And the expense wouldn't exist without COVID-19 or would be for a substantially different purpose. So basically making sure that that expense is meets these 5 criteria, then it would be considered an eligible cost. And then just some information about we don't have to have any receipts or proof of payment for costs incurred for the Department of Commerce, although we are still required to maintain sufficient accounting records to make sure that we have the appropriate program records to make that will be accessible for the Department of Commerce or the state auditor. They also state that there may be some monitoring visits. Those could be potentially scheduled. So that's what I have right now, just as far as the process goes of what we're doing with the coronavirus relief funds. And if there's any questions for that?
I can't see anybody, so I'm going to go back off to not screen share. We have a little bit more to share on just other revenues and then coming back to our planning of covering expenses. So I think we can have the discussion about any use of it at this point, which would be for the homeless vouchers after we run through all the rest of the information, if that's okay with council. Okay, Doug, I'm going to go back to screen share for the next topic on There we go. Okay, sorry.
All right. So the next issue I wanted to talk about was just give an update on the Substitute House Bill, or SHB 1406, where we are in the process with this one, and then what to expect or what we need to do next for this. Again, Substitute House Bill 1406 is the local state shared tax for affordable and supportive housing. This allows the local jurisdictions to impose, a local state shared sales and use tax to fund affordable or supportive housing. Again, this is the consumer does not pay this tax, and the effective sales tax rate remains the same. So kind of just like we do with our LIFT funds, instead this tax is credited against the 6.5 state sales tax. Potential city revenue with the 0.0146% is going to be about $63,000 annually for this tax. So how do we impose this tax? Well, we have to do both of the following things here. So first is a resolution of intent to adopt the legislation by January 28th of 2020. And council did already do that on January 22nd. There was a resolution adopted to intend to adopt the legislation. And then by July 28th, we have to have legislation or an ordinance approved by council to authorize the tax. So we'll need to get that done by July 28th. So what we'd like to do is to bring forward an ordinance to authorize the tax on our June 24th council meeting. And then the Department of Revenue would impose its effective date. It has to be within 30 or after 30 days and not until the first of the following month. So it wouldn't be effective until August 1 of 2020. And then distribution would be included in the August 2020 distribution. This gets distributed with our other state taxes. When they come in, this will just be included with that. So that is where we are hoping to go with that. And so we'll bring forward an ordinance on the 24th to get that moving. So any questions on that?
The reason why I asked Doug to give a little, because we did have a small committee meeting with Melissa, Gary, and Richard and kind of talk through this. And really in that committee meeting was kind of realized that we have until the end of July to do an ordinance in order to then take the tax. But if we do it sooner, we get the tax sooner, which I think if I would have realized that a little earlier on, we probably would have asked you guys to do this quicker. So that's why. And so I don't know if Richard or Melissa or Gary want to speak to any of this. We could draft it, I think as soon as maybe even June 10 or the 24th. But if we do it before or by the 24th, it's just a time lag to enact it with Department of Revenue. So that's why we wanted to at least get some of this money coming in. So if any of the other council members want to comment on that, that's why we brought it forward to talk about tonight. Any thoughts? Okay. We'll go back to Doug's presentation.
So before Doug gets started, could we have a little conversation about the CARES funds allocations?
Sure. What we were going to talk through with council is that we haven't received all the funding yet. We wouldn't allocate any expenses until we had a plan as we went forward, with the exception of the emergency kind of money for the hotels. So if you'd like, I can pull up the screen, what we shared in the memo with council 2 weeks ago, if you want to talk through with that visual. Is that would you like to do that?
So I actually had a question about this. We heard from some of our business community leaders this evening about the needs for some of the businesses to acquire some capital so that they can reopen or make adjustments. And it's my understanding that some of these CARE funds could actually be allocated to our business community in the forms of grants. And when I look over what we've got laid out from 2 weeks ago, I don't see anything in there for that. am I mistaken on the fact that this can be used to issue some small business grants to help our small businesses maybe recover a little bit from this?
Oh, it can be used for that.
So it looks to me, I've got the sheet here, and maybe you want to pull it up so the rest of the council can look at it. I just don't see anything in here for that. And that's part of the reason I was hoping we could have a committee meeting to have some discussions about how we allocate these things. But
there was the $225,000 CDBG CV funds that were allocated, half for micro enterprise and half for rental assistance.
Yep, different monies.
Different monies, but same purpose.
Hold on one second. I'm just.
Also, so council will know as you're waiting here, there is an expectation that HUD will release more of those CDBG CV funds, those COVID relief funds, in the weeks ahead. So that will be another further decision to make on whether or not to go the small business grant route as well.
So I just tried to pull up this initial allocation. This was again done with our small committee of our council members that talked through this. Yes, we can absolutely give it to business. I think the thought when we had, and people correct me if I'm wrong, the council members were in the small committee, was that there would be the CDBG funding that could go directly to business. Now that we know that there'll be another round, I think that's super encouraging. But that with the $1 million coming, that this there is legitimate expenses for your own city staff, which I'll remind you that many of them have been laid off completely. So in order to protect the city services and our ability to do that we would allocate the CARES specifically to city needs, but we can absolutely change that because there is the legal ability to give it to business.
So I guess my concern is, and I was part of that small committee, I don't think, at least I wasn't fully aware of where all the uses could be made. Wasn't aware the small business could benefit from this. Even that being said, this is a recommendation to council. Council hasn't adopted this recommendation yet. We're looking to start spending money out of this fund. It just seems to me that we need to adopt the acceptance of the money. We need to adopt the allocation of that money before we start spending out of it. Now we're going to just start taking bits and pieces out of something that council's never adopted and adopt it through an executive order. It just seems a little out of place to me.
I'm going to heartily disagree. The only thing that I would have intended to bring forward is the money for the hotel vouchers. I think this was a starting of a conversation about what we could do. That's what my staff does. We take a look at what our needs are for the rest of the year, and we try and lay out points of conversation with City Council. This money isn't even received yet. Once it is received, we'll actually have some more data as we move through. So when we outline those decisions on what we do now, which was the layoffs and the budget freeze and the hiring freezes, the next phase then is to look at the actual revenues coming in and the impact. So at the end of August, 1st of September, and what other revenues are coming and the decisions that are made. So I want to make very clear, this is that small committee in my mind. The understanding was that we outline a draft plan for council to continue those discussions on. So I want to apologize if that is not how it came across to council members, but I certainly am not thinking that I'm going to use the power that I would have to start spending the money that we don't have in even yet. So
I was under the impression, Jill, the way you stated it, this is how you explained it to us, and that's what that's how I intended it to be. I mean, that was my understanding of how it was going to go. At this point, it looks like what we're asking to do, or what you're asking to do now, is to let us or allocate the $30,000 for this now, but the rest of the money hasn't been spent.
And it
over-
wouldn't be spent, and then there isn't an intention to just do that. I think when I laid out in the memo after the consultant was this place to start for conversation about how this can be used, how it can be used to take care of the shortfall that we're planning for, but that we have decision points along the way. And so that's the intent of the conversation and of the memo itself.
And the priorities were laid out that way. You know,
That's why
these
we
are the
did the
first
priorities,
priorities, these
right.
are second priorities, third could be shifted if necessary, or if that's what the council wanted to do. I understood it that way. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is Richard. If I could weigh in for just a second, I've been very jealous lately, looking at the big counties with the big economies south of us and the huge amount of support that they've been getting from the federal government. And Snohomish was able to take a $60 million, Snohomish County, $60 million CARES award and turn around and provide 40 million of that for these kinds of enterprises. So I'm not sure what the county is doing and how that's going to fit in. And I think we ought to reach a hand out and ask those questions of the county. I agree that we want to do everything we can to help our businesses, and I think we all do. This is such a small amount of funding, and we have quite a few needs that we need to take care of in the city. You know, kind of tend to like the plan. I know it's still a plan, and hope that there's some additional funding, and hope that we can work with the counties on their allocations as well, because we obviously want to help our businesses get out of this as quickly and comfortably as possible.
I'm trying to scroll through to see who was wanting to talk, so just bear with me because I can't get you on one with the share screen. The other thing that is going to change is spoke with Congresswoman Zelvene and Senator Patty Murray. We are hoping that the federal government in the next round of funding takes seriously allocations direct to local governments. So that, again, in all of our notes here is that with whatever funding else comes in, things can shift around. We can do a lot of different things. And so what I've been assured by Susan and Patty both in the language of the bill, one specifically that's already passed the House, is that there's direct funding to local governments for their operations. So it's stuck in the Senate at the moment, but there's all sorts of things that could be happening. So as we walk through the year and either realize what we anticipate, $5.3 million shortfall, whether that grows, whether we do better, we have all of these sort of outlines in place of where those priorities go. And then we fit in what pockets can take care of those particular needs. Just like the Department of Justice grant police are working on and a couple of other FEMA grants, as we learn from those things, funding can shift around. But the intent in having a plan was to make sure we're taking care of our city services and our ability to continue doing that level of service and those needs prior to giving it out.
So I just want to be clear. I'm not accusing the mayor or staff or anyone else of trying to go behind council's back. The reason I bring this up tonight is because I wanted to have this discussion. I wanted to have this discussion 2 weeks ago on how we allocate it, and I want to have full council discussion on it. Again, we haven't received the money yet. We haven't voted to accept the money. We haven't voted to allocate the money. I have no problem with spending the $30,000 to help those that are the most vulnerable in our community. My biggest issue is I don't feel that we're following the proper process before we start spending the money. And that's just my observation. I could be dead wrong, but it feels to me like council should have full discussion on this, and this is why I've asked for a finance committee meeting or a public safety committee meeting to where we could have these discussions.
And that's my misunderstanding, because I believe we can have those discussions in the meetings that we are having. I don't think it has to be a specific committee in order to do that. So I just don't know what else other than I apologize if there's been a misunderstanding.
So budget law limitations by operation of law are suspended in an emergency. That includes competitive bidding and whether or not you need to make a budget amendment prior to the expenditure of funds. That's written into the code and written into state statute. So procedurally, when you proclaim an emergency, which is ratified, and in this particular case, it also specifically granted the authority of the executive to take timely action needed to combat the emergency, the proper procedure by operation of law today in these unique circumstances is that the mayor may enter into such contracts, authorize payment for services, approve gifts, grants, or loans accepted by or made by the mayor during the emergency, and obligate the city into contracts, so long as at the earliest practical time the city council is apprised of that commitment and ratifies such through resolution. Certainly you have, through a check and balance, the authority not to ratify that if you feel that the contract doesn't adequately address the emergency. But I just want to reaffirm that this isn't business as usual, and it's actually very hard for us to operate. And there's a lot of, I'll just say, on my position, discussions of intense and continuous nature of how can we get things done that we need to get things done when we're operating under a limited set of rules of what council can actually entertain until that order expires. Because certainly our obligation too is to follow the Open Public Meetings Act and the new restrictions too, given the more limited transparency. So those are the issues. Certainly you don't have to approve this. Hopefully the order expires by the end of the month and we can go comply with the phase 1 or phase 2 and open up our agendas.
Can I just have a question? A couple of weeks ago when I brought this up, you felt at that time that because what we're talking about was COVID related, both with these monies that were coming in and the financial decisions we have to make as far as the cuts into the budget so that we can meet the shortfall. You felt that because they were COVID related or directly result of COVID, that we could have those meetings. Has that position changed?
The order requires that it has to be necessary to either address the COVID or it has to be routine and necessary. That's the language of the order. How you define that is open to interpretation. And I believe my statement was, I think you have made an astute observation, as the longer this continues, the more council is going to need to have greater knowledge. Now a strict interpretation can be, if it can wait, then it should wait. But we haven't seen any case law, further guidance by the state. And the issue, I think we had greater discussion was, I think Brock Smith did a hypothetical about a bond issue. And I was like, I don't know, maybe so, maybe not. So I don't think I gave you a clear yes. I think I gave you, like any good lawyer will, a clear, that's a good point, maybe you can. And certainly we can look into it if this order is extended. But even if we continue committees, we have to narrow them under this existing order and show a reason to the public and to the governors why we need to have that committee to address that specific issue. And believe me, we're having that discussion internally.
Yeah. So as we go down the road, we're projecting a $5.6 million shortfall in revenues, and the further we go down the road, the worse off we are. We've got less and less opportunity to respond to those shortfalls. So
yeah, no, I hear you.
But we're also under, I think what's confusing is we're under the order we can't meet physically. So that's why this is our meeting. it's a virtual meeting. We're complying with the OPMA. We can't meet together in a committee setting until those are done. So maybe that's where some of the confusion is lying. That's where I figured this is our meeting. So maybe that's where it's confusing.
I'd like to hear thoughts from my fellow council members, if they have anything to chime in on.
And you'll have to just chime in because I can't see all of you at one time.
This is Richard. I've said for a few weeks, I'm super frustrated that our hands are tied like this, and things are becoming more essential all the time. I hope that we're all lucky, as Andy said, with his fingers crossed earlier, and this is lifted this weekend to go to phase 2, and they include this in the executive order. But let's see what happens. I think we all want to get back to normal business as quickly as possible, even if we have to figure out how to do that under some other order. But I'm anxious, like Mark, to move ahead, and all of you, I assume.
One thing I did look at, because Brock Smith mentioned the phase 2. I looked at yesterday the order that we're operating under the Open Public Meetings Act restrictions. And then I looked at the phase 2 petition and the requirements, and they are independent. So it could be phase 3, phase 4, phase 10. It's this independent order, proclamation, I think 20.8, that expires by the end of the month. That's going to control city council meetings, planning commission meetings. Your guess is as good as mine what the governor's intentions are. You probably have maybe greater insight than I do.
Well, we definitely had some input from the governor's staff that they are strongly considering, amendments, if not revoking this next week, which might have been this week, but they're obviously worried about it like we are.
Yeah, so we could still be in phase 1, and this order could be amended or expired to allow you greater agenda flexibility while still being in a phase 1.
Gary, did you have something?
Yeah. Kevin answered it because I was asking what is next week going to look like, but
it's not the agenda issue. It's that we can't meet in a committee setting, and that's what I think we're stumbling over a little bit.
The guidance strongly discourages committees unless you can show a really strong factual predicate why you must meet in a committee. And like I think Holston and I had in the last committee meeting, the longer this goes on, the longer I think you have a better case. But we're in uncharted waters legally as we are policy-wise.
Okay.
Do we want to go ahead and continue with Doug's update?
Can I chime in for just a minute?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
I've been a little quiet only because I'm feeling deflated. I think that, we've been at this now for 2 or 3 months, and I just keep going back to what I said 2 weeks ago, that we're looking at a $5.8 million gaping hole. And I feel like whatever we need to do drastically, we need to quote someone else, we need to turn that dial all the way up now. And if we need to make adjustments the other way as the year goes on, we should. And I just don't feel like we're there. I feel like we're going to get to the fall and we're going to have this huge deficit. And so that bothers me.
Is there thoughts of what other things that we should be doing right now?
I'm trying to stay in my lane with that. I'm just looking at the bottom line here, and I understand that we have furloughed employees, and we have drastically cut services, but we're all feeling this pinch. I mean, right? We're seeing that the garbage in the parks isn't being emptied as much, the grass isn't being mowed as much, but I think we all understand that these are really, really uncharted, scary times. And I'm not going to get to the fall. This is just me. I'm just not going to get to the fall and vote to increase people's taxes and then take away from a huge chunk of our savings account when we don't know what it's going to look like 7 or 8 months down the road. That's where I'm at.
I hear you, Melissa. I think that's why personally I like the process that we've got, is that we're going to revisit. We start here, we make these adjustments, and then we're going to see how the revenues come in, and then where we are, then we make more adjustments. I don't think I'm not with you on the whole let's just rip the Band-Aid off right this very minute and then rebuild from there. So I'm not in that viewpoint, but I understand what your thoughts are.
Please know that is generally how I do things in my life. Just rip that Band-Aid off.
That doesn't surprise me.
I understand that's not how everybody rolls.
I'd have to agree with Councilmember Beaton. I don't think we've gone far enough in filling the deficit that we're facing. We can always add to or back into the budget. It's really hard as we go further into the year to take away from that budget. I mean, just an example, and this is getting kind of off of the CARES money, but if we were to have a discussion about the GMT revenue, it's $800 and some thousand. We're looking at putting 383 into the general governmental funds. We could have a discussion about putting the whole thing in there, the whole 885,000. We put the whole thing in there. That takes us down to $1 million that we're looking at being short from the cuts. And those are discussions I think that are appropriate for committee. A little difficult to have in a council meeting, but I mean, I'm willing to have them.
I think I am remembering correctly that we talked about saving some of that money just in case we have to, and when they true everything up, we might have to pay something back. We could possibly have to pay something back, and don't want to have to dive into other funds for that. At least that's what I remember.
Yeah, we discussed about putting 225,000 of it away, but we also talked about buying some additional equipment and things for the fire department. I mean, we have that discussion. We didn't have it in the budget to buy those this year. We've got this revenue coming in. To go back to your point of 225,000, I'd rather figure out where to come up with 225,000 than 1.5 million. So I'm just looking at what are our options to fill this. There's been a substantial savings realized through the work that's been done, but we're still looking at the end of the year right now is almost $1.6 million deficit.
Mm-hmm.
There's either we have to go further in cuts, we have to move revenues from one place to another, or we have to spend fund balance.
Mm-hmm.
So,
or we realize new funding coming from the federal government. We have other grants that come through. I think it'd be premature to say lay off additional people at this point, simply because we don't want to lose folks if we don't need to. And even if we start making decisions on a monthly basis, it's still projections. I think Doug has some information in his collections of sales tax that he got already, how things can change so easily. So I don't want council to lose sight of additional revenues that could come and assist us as we go through different phases of federal government and even state government help.
I appreciate that, Mayor, but the fact is we don't know if those monies are coming in or not. And that's where we have the opportunity to either move some funding from one area to another, like this GEMT money. We could move the whole thing into the general fund. That helps with that bottom line.
Absolutely.
If we realize some of those federal dollars coming back, then we could move those back over into those expenditures we wanted to make with the funds that we currently have available, if that makes sense.
If council,
I think for me and I think for Councilmember Beaton, we don't like looking at the $1.6 million that we're still projected to be short after all of the work's been done in the budget. So if there's some other areas where we can move the money in from, cover that without raising taxes, without touching fund balance, we're more comfortable with that, or at least I'm more comfortable with that. And then as those federal dollars come in that are possibly out there, then we can reallocate those back to kind of the wish list of things that we had to do with these dollars.
okay. I think that makes it clear to me. If that's all that I need to do is to go back and get that down, I can absolutely do that. I'm happy to do that for the next conversation. Is there a target that you want me to get to? Because I can give you scenarios of taking out the entire 1.6, but that will be service and layoffs of people, because we've already taken out pretty much everything else, and I'm fine with that. I just would like some guidance so that I can.
So I would like to see us be at a balanced budget with the cuts that have already been made, and with any additional cuts or funding transfers, so that we're not looking at tapping fund balance.
So no use of fund balance at all.
That's correct.
Is that consensus?
That's what I feel, and the reason I say that is we're experiencing fewer cases of COVID-19 right now. We don't know what's going to come back in the fall and wintertime. We could be going through this whole thing all over again, and unless we make the deep cuts now, if we start taking fund balance away now, we don't have anything to do at the end of the year. We need to make the cuts now, add back as we can as dollars come in. That fund balance really has to be a last ditch effort. And if we're getting into late winter or late fall and early winter, and we see the same kind of decreases that we've seen, we don't have an opportunity to make those adjustments, to make those cuts. So the only thing we have left is fund balance at that point in time.
Isn't that what fund balance is for? I hate to ask that question that way, but I was under the impression and that's the fund balance was for emergencies.
It is absolutely for emergencies. But if we take the money now, if we take 1.5 million of that fund balance now, and we end up another $2 million short at the end of the year or towards the end of the year because we've run into this virus coming back up, everybody's getting shut down again, we're going to drain it.
But we're not taking it. I guess I'm not seeing it, Mark. I wish like you, we were having a committee meeting so we could, talk to each other face to face. I'm not seeing where we're actually taking that money out with. This is just a plan. It's just a roadmap. This is what could be. We don't know. That's why it's being, we have those checkpoints. So I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be dense. I'm just trying to understand where you're coming from.
And I think what you're looking at it is as a roadmap, a kind of a guidance document. And I'm looking at it more as the Holy Grail. These are the things we have to do to get to where we need to be. And if there's additional funds come in, then we can reallocate those. So if the mayor's correct and the feds print some more money and dump it in our bank account, we can do something with that. We can't count on that. I don't believe we can count on that. I think what we can count on is the work that that's been done in collaboration with the mayor, the staff, and the small group that we had. The three of us that met, and we went through and we agreed on furloughs and staffing reductions and hiring freezes and no travel, and we talked about all that stuff and we've agreed on that. At the end of the day, it still shows us almost $1.6 million short from what our projected shortfall is going to be. So basically, we saved $4 million, $4.1 million. We still got about 1.6 to go. I think we have to plan for that 1.6 now, and then as we go further into the year, if other funds become available, we can make those adjustments. So I think we just look at it as a little bit different. To me, this is it's like the budget. We set the parameters, and that's what we work toward. If we adopt this, we're working towards only using $1.6 million of fund balance. I'd like to work towards using no fund balance, making the tough choices now. As Melissa said, rip the Band-Aid off now, and then work upwards if the climate improves.
It's Richard. Yeah, I don't like in that term, rip the Band-Aid off. Yeah, there's too many important things and functions and services and people. As far as your question, Mayor, it seems like having additional options so that we can bowl on at the next meeting makes sense, but it seems like there's just too much uncertainty right now to bear down to zero, and the implications of that another couple, 3 weeks is going to give us a lot more information as we see how deep of a hole we're in and what the federal government's going to do. So I like the idea of having options. I think you're right on, Mark. I totally want the committee and us to have these conversations. I don't want to rip any Band-Aids off immediately.
So one of the things I wanted to bring up is I would like, Jill, you would ask me, you know, what would we like to see? And for me, it's the options, lay out a couple different things. But I mean, I'm wondering, with what we were presented, what was the percentage of the cut to the departments? What is that?
Yeah, I have that in my slides. So hold on. So this is just a chart of the proposal. So it varies from department by department when it comes down to it, the $3.3 million of cuts. So, and then just so you know, this whole memo is in your council packet right now, so you can refer to it, and I'll send you a hyperlink to it if you'd like, where we've cut out the S&B. I'm trying to point where you can't see that. Okay. So the S&B means the salaries and benefits. So that's either furloughs, well, that's a combination of furloughs and layoffs in each of those particular departments, or frozen positions for the duration of the year, starting June 1st. The operations are the cuts to the what would be non-discretionary spending. We only have about $1 million, or no, it's only 10% of any of our budgets are non-discretionary in the first place. So coming through to this point of the year, this is the operations part. So that's everything from travel, the city council, $4,000. For some reason, you guys have $4,000 in office expenses, and then you have $1,000 in travel. So I just took some of that, hope you don't mind, to put it there. Same thing and going through those. So you see the total savings for each department, and then you see the percent of savings that it equals to. So clearly the library is the hardest hit when it comes to salaries and benefits. They're part-time and they're full-time staffing. So you can just see the detail there. So all this is stuff that, you know, we're happy to share and as we go through the conversations.
So when was this put in our packet? Do you know? Because this is what I've been looking for.
Yeah,
this is what I need to help me kind of process. And what I was getting was just total figures, when this is this is like, it just puts a big smile on my face because this is what I needed to see.
Well, this was the presentation for tonight. So this is the memo that was put
Oh,
in
so
there.
we haven't gotten
today.
to it.
No.
But I mean, but I was in
Yeah.
there earlier today and I didn't see it. So I don't know if maybe sometimes we could, you know, if we could get this stuff so that I can like, you know, on a Friday, so I can dive in and really look at this stuff. That would be very, very helpful to me.
Yeah. So I put in there around 1. The only reason why it's generally the day of is because what I would try to do is do the presentation, then you've got it to refer back to. But even things are changing with the revenues. We got our sales tax revenues in, so things just tweak. So I could put it in, but then it's kind of then replacing it. So, but it's up to council for sure.
Okay.
Yeah. But that was the slides I have here are really kind of that next conversation of where we're at with all the other stuff. So. Do we want to finish up with Doug and then go back to the slides that I had for updates? Would that be?
Hey, Jill, can you hear me?
Yeah, hold on.
Okay, my internet's all messing up, so I can hear everything, but I'm getting kicked off every once in a while. So
okay, you have a screen; it just has your name, so it's fine.
Yeah, I can see yes, I can see the screen, just no pictures.
Okay. How about if we go back to Doug and he can share with you the recent figures from sales tax? Okay.
Okay. First of all, so on the 13th, I gave an update on all the main revenue sources and stuff. Nothing has changed since then, but they will be at the end of this week. So then they'll all be updated. But I did get some new numbers for the sales tax. I thought I was going to throw it in here and talk to you about it today. So looking at the bottom right side first, so you can see there are total revenues that came in for May. These would be for the March sales revenues, came in at $558,000. That's about $140,000 less than 2019. But I do want to point out, I mean, it is what it is, but the number last year in for May collection was an extremely high month compared to, you know, we usually we can see months kind of compare back and forth. Like February is usually a high month for some, you know, for I guess the Christmas holiday and stuff like that. But May's usually nothing too substantial, but last year it was. So anyway, but still we were about $140,000 under for what we collected last May. So we're at this point, we're at $2.9 million. We're about 168,000 under what we collected last year at this time. So that's about 5.37%. Looking at the upper left there, as you can see there right now, overall, as compared to our budget of $7.8 million, we're about $185,000 under what we thought we would be at this point. And that's about 5.89% under. In our initial memo that we sent and what we were estimating, and they were just estimates, but we're estimating for sales tax revenues at being down by about 30% with this COVID crisis. So we're right now sitting at 5.89. And so I just wanted to share this revenue to you. I was kind of anticipating the number to be lower. So this was good news that we came up to this one, but we'll see how it goes, you know, the next months to come. And the faster we can get things moving, obviously, then those numbers will hopefully improve. So this is where we are right now. We just received these revenues and I just thought I would share them. The last slide that I have is for TBD. And again, of course, it's going to be the same as sales tax because the same percentage. So basically, for looking at the bottom right there, for May of last year, we collected 163. This year, 131. So we're about $31,000 less. And overall, we're about 5.3% below where we were, what we collected in total last year at this time. And then on the upper left, we showed that we brought a total of $697,000. in comparison to where we are with our budget of 1.8 million, we're under by about $31,000. And again, how I come up with those numbers are just based off of last year's, how the revenues came in month by month. I use that same percentage with the budget to say, I mean, it's not rocket science or anything like that, but just saying that that's how those revenues are going to tend to come in this year too, in those particular months. So saying that, we're about 4% below. And again, also in our initial estimates, I have about a 30% reduction in TBD for this too. So just wanted to give an update on where we are right now for these that are coming in. Any questions on those at all?
Doug, I don't have any questions on those revenues, but how are the rest of the city revenues coming in, or is it too early to tell, like on the sale or the property tax and the other revenues that we normally look at?
Yeah, and so on the 13th, I gave an update on all of those. So those have all been, I haven't received any others from the state or the county since then. So as far as property tax goes, I reported last time on the 13th, we're about 3% under on property taxes. That's about 71,000 out of $5 million budget. I'm just talking about general fund. I don't have right in front of me here the entire amount that goes between library and parks. So we're property tax is coming in fairly consistent of where we thought it would be at this point. I was kind of expecting a lot more. I know people have some deferrals where they don't have to pay their property taxes yet, and it looks like we didn't see a lot of that. It was coming in how we kind of expected it to. So, and other than that, the other revenues, major revenues, we haven't collected any more since. So hopefully by the next time we meet, I'll have those and I can update all of these again and present those.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, Doug.
Yep.
Any other questions for Doug? Okay. I know the internet connections seem to be in and out, just so I might undo my video if it proves unstable again, because you all have frozen a few times on me. So, okay. So we can go back to my update. I also had asked the chiefs to give a quick update like we've been doing. What would we like to do? Maybe we can have the chiefs, and then if they have to scoot, we can go on from there. Okay, so Chief Kamek, would you like to go next?
Sorry, I had trouble unmuting myself there. Yeah, just a quick update on stuff. You know, most of our focus has probably been non-COVID related. Over the weekend up through yesterday, you know, we dealt with a couple of weapon offenses. One was an accident that the witnesses went out to, and the driver of that one was armed, and we dealt with that situation. Fortunately, nobody was hurt. We dealt with a shooting offense late Sunday night, early Monday morning. That was involved in a physical altercation where a weapon was used. And again, fortunately, nobody was hurt. And then yesterday we brought to resolution an ongoing domestic violence kind of kidnapping type of situation where we've been pursuing the suspect who's been involved for several weeks, and he's eluded a number of different police agencies, and we brought that to fruition yesterday. So our work, our normal work, I guess, that can go on, our service calls of different variety, they're staying on pace. In addition to that, we've had a number of different officers do some cool things for the kids in the school systems, mainly pushing out to Facebook and to school sites for kids who are sheltered at home. There's a fit challenge, things going on with a couple of officers that have done posting on Facebook. We've contributed to the library's reading program, and there's, I think, over a dozen officers who have produced for that. And those are getting published to the library and also on our page as well. And then Sergeant Brandon Young and his squad and a group of people put together a virtual tour that got uploaded to the school site so the classrooms could tune in and take their police field trip. So, and then in addition to that, last week, or I guess a week and a half ago, when the kind of unemployment fraud hit. We had to adjust to that because we were taking a huge number of case reportings to come in. So we had to set up some online reporting specifically for that. And we're still getting those in. As of last week, a few days ago, I think we were over 50 reported to us there. And so there's not a big investigative piece to it, but there is a reporting piece that falls on us, and then we just to track it. So that's probably the main things that I would report tonight.
Any questions for Chris? Feel free to jump in.
I have a quick question, Chris. So I actually am a victim of that employment or that fraud. And I went through ESD, but is there something through the police department that I should do that is online?
No, and on our website, we've pointed to the state and then the links that people should be doing. It's just that usually the credit agencies and stuff say report to your local police. But the investigative piece is coming at kind of a state and federal level. So for us, we're just doing it to track so that the person has a case number to report back to whomever's asking for it.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Go ahead, Richard.
Yeah, I'm curious. Are you able to provide us any observations or comment on? We've heard a couple times there was additional releases from the jail and something about additional activity downtown. Are you seeing that play out in?
Well, we do. I mean, we have a lot of activity downtown, in different spectrums. When the vouchered program ended in the motels, a lot of those individuals went back, to woods or streets or park areas and stuff like that. One of the capabilities we have this year that we didn't have is with our park ranger who's now been out. So one of the things that he's done is he's paired up with our work crew. So Nolan, who's on our work crew, one of the things that they do is they move around to all of the common sites where there's been trespassing and then encampments have been built. And so they make rounds around to those locations to see where that's occurring, because then that contributes to trail use of undesired users, and then it discourages desired users from that. So there's a piece that goes on there. There's work that he's doing specifically down with visibility just along the trail as well, because we've got a lot of walkers, a lot of bikers, a lot of people that are using that trail, and we want them feeling comfortable and safe to do that, because the more desired users that are there, it discourages the undesired user behavior that goes on. And it's not just transient activity. You get some malmiss from folks and different things. We've been dealing with some stuff over by Edgewater Park because there's encampments that are further out into the county, and so we get walking traffic back and forth that comes over to West Mount Vernon. He's been dealing with there's a power post out there that attracts people to charge phones and do different things, and then that leads to cross traffic over into neighborhoods and through yards and through stores. So one of the things that I think he's done well is he's getting established with knowing who some of the individuals are. So he's got relationships with them. We had a recent assault where he contributed to kind of knowing who some of them were, so we could identify the suspect that was involved. So we're trying to, be consistent with that visibility down around the boardwalk and the trail. There are some limitations in his commission about how far he can go, but it's a capability we have now that we didn't have last year. And then in addition to that, we're trying to not be foresightful about, the evening activities that are going on, because it's now lighter at night. So we have him working later at night and, being visible in other parks and being visible on Little Mountain, being visible in those other locations as well, and, addressing behavior.
Okay. Any other questions for Chief Gannick? Great. All right. Thank you, Chris. Yeah. All right, Chief Price.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. So I think the biggest update would be last week from Unified Command. collectively, we put together 4 different letters. One of those that was the prime letter was a letter from the Department of Health / the Health Commission. And that was just trying to articulate to the governor's office about our support for our movement to phase 2. So when you look at the criteria for the variants to move there, we hit all of those targets with the exception of just one, which was the case count numbers, where they have said that you have to have under a certain number of cases per 100,000. So we'd have to have under 10 per 100,000. So we would need to have under 13. We weren't able to hit that at that time, but we were hoping and anticipating that our numbers would continue to drop. Also that we would hopefully be able to move to that variant despite the fact that we hadn't hit those numbers. So in preparation of the application for that variance, we sent 4 letters last week, one from the Health Commission, one from all 4 of the mayors and towns, and then one from the first responders, police chiefs and fire chiefs from the county, and then one from the Unified Command. Each letter just kind of articulated our different points about the things that have been put in place here in Skagit that we think make us unique in our preparation for the move to phase 2. There was no complete expectation that these letters would be received without the application and say, oh yes, here you go, you can go to this phase 2. We were in the process of completing that application, and we are completing that application, I should say. And that application will be voted on Friday by the Board of Health and then submitted to the governor for a request for that variance. With that, what that allows us, hopefully, knock on wood, is if our numbers today stay down along with tomorrow's numbers, we will hit the case count for being under the 13 that would be allowed for us to meet the targets for that variance going forward. So we'll submit that letter on Friday. Other counties have submitted their letters and received notification very quickly back. Island County, as an example, submitted their variance letter on a Friday and received notification on Saturday about their allowance to move to phase 2 as well. We think the timing is really good for our request from the standpoint of the governor's orders are set to expire on the end of May as it is. So he'd have to make some kind of additional, either staying in phase 1, changing the variance levels, or moving us all to phase 2. So again, timing is really good with regard to that. I know there was the article this morning that talked about the headline being about the governor rejects those. I talked with the reporters over there, and they felt that that wasn't really the intent of how they wanted to portray that. And I think the headline just took more notice than it should have. We didn't expect there to be a, yes, governor, thanks Skagit County for everything, and moves that forward. And I think when they talked to the staff and the way it was written, it kind of got written a little harsher than what it was. The application is we're going to be judged on, not the letters. So there's still a very high optimistic piece that we will be able to move to a phase 2 very shortly, since we seem to be meeting all the variance levels. Those are the major updates. Anything I can answer for any of the council?
So I did have one question, Chief. We had last week or week before, I can't remember now, you and I had a discussion, and the mayor was included in that discussion about a SAFER grant. Were we able to get that application in? And I'm not sure that the rest of the council's fully aware of that, but because of the COVID-19, there's some opportunities there for the city.
Yeah, so the SAFER grant is a staffing grant that's offered by FEMA, and it comes around every year. And there's certain parameters that have to be met by agencies that are looking for that. The key to that is, one, there's usually a match from the cities, 25% each year, and then it goes up to 65% in the third year. But the other key to that is it can't be for existing staff or existing positions. It has to be for new additional positions being added to a department. So they came out because of COVID, and they removed some of those restrictions. Some of those were the matching requirement, and then also the ability to supplant the positions. In reading the initial material, when we looked at it, there was concern over the way they had the words, the replacing the supplanting, and then there was a note about additional positions. So they had some confusing language in there. And then there was also just an additional concern about if we went forward with the hiring process and we don't find out for these positions until, let's say, September, but we've got to hire them in July so we can get them to the academy. do they now count under that, you know, the existing employees versus just the positions we're trying to add? We feel that from talking with FEMA that these positions we're looking to hire, the 4 positions, would meet those requirements, and we would be able to apply. So yes, we did get the application in today. They're supposed to be sending the first round of notifications beginning in July.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Chief? Okay, great, thank you. Continuing to do an outstanding job in unifying command. So. Okay, then the last thing was being able to go through just a briefing from me on what we've been working on. So I'm going to pull up the slides so I can walk you through this. Oops, sorry. There we go. Okay. The Chief Bryce did talk about that advocacy on phase 2 reopening. And so we're really pleased that Skagit County is moving forward with that. And hopefully we'll know something maybe by Saturday. That'd be cool. I was invited to be on a call with Governor Inslee on Friday morning, along with 6 other elected officials. Ron Wiest and I will be representing Skagit County. Then there's representatives from the city of Bellingham, Whatcom County, 1 from Island County, and 1 from San Juan. So we'll continue our advocacy for reopening phase 2 with the governor at that time. Another thing that has come up in speaking with a business that cannot reopen until phase 3, and that's Riverside Health Club. You know, it kind of brought some glaring issues with businesses that aren't going to be able to even open at phase 2 and what could be done for them. And so they have an ability to do some limited, but just not open fully. So it's something that I thought I'd talk with the governor about. Also, our federal delegation just seems like a gap there that we hadn't really thought about before. The other thing is the advocacy to the federal assistance for local government. And that's what I just mentioned, just continuing to support that bill going from the House into the Senate and any direct federal assistance to local government operations. Council meetings in phase 2. This is that next week maybe thing. If we're still mandated to meet virtually, then we'll continue with this. If there's the OPMA order, and the other order from the governor expires, then we have leaned forward working with our chiefs in having a public safety committee next Wednesday. Of course, we have to plan for reopening, what that means, being able to bring the public, have access to that committee meeting, but social distance. And so Chief Campbell's done a great job kind of leading the way with that lobby, looking at reopening the court. So it helped dovetail. We do have a small committee that's been meeting on reopening planning in general. We have a meeting tomorrow. So regardless of what happens with the governor's orders, we'll be ready to meet in person whenever that is, whether it's next week, Wednesday, or on June 10. Just kind of going back to our goals of decision making as we work through the pandemic, I think it's really crucial that we always go back to what those goals are. We go back to what our mission is as a city. So that's maintaining essential staffing levels in order to achieve our workload without our legal requirement, to maintain the legal requirements and mitigate risk. That's where having some clear direction from council to provide pathways forward to use less of fund balance is important for me to hear and to plan for going all the way to 0. I'm happy to put forward that, but I would also implore the council to look at putting the city at risk. Plan for the total revenue shortfall of 5.35 million. Again, those different phases of making some of the decisions are immediate, which I'm going to go over in a minute. What we would do between June and August, what we would do between September and November, and then at the end of the year. You could even say September and October and November and December as well. Continuing our current capital projects, communicate a unified message to our staff and the public, and determine that usage of fund balance based on council's direction. So to date, we have completed layoffs. We've kind of broken this down into 2 different things. You probably were really aware that we had sent 17 full-time people and 27 part-time people home as a furlough that was unpaid. We converted some of those into actual layoffs, eliminating the positions altogether this last week. You can see the breakdown there. So 11 full-time and 21 part-time. We did continue the furloughs for certain staff members simply because we anticipate, in the library specifically, we anticipate one full-time person leaving the area. And so wanting to maintain some folks in the ability to call back. Same thing with finance. If we open to the public, that one full-time layoff that we completed, we'll have public coming in now. So to be able to handle that demand with one person doesn't make sense. And so part-time there. So as you can see, there's some different reasoning for having folks still unpaid, but subject to callback. And then implementing the 56-hour furloughs for our non-represented folks. Our Teamsters Union did agree to a 56-hour furlough as well. So I want to really thank them for really participating, really understanding where we're at with the city finances and being willing to come on board. We still are in negotiations with our police and fire unions. The fire union is under a formal negotiation of their contract altogether. Aaron Keeter, our HR manager, and I Zoom meeting with the police guild president then, and they would come to the table with a concession if that's what they can do with their membership. So it was a positive meeting. I think went over the exact same memo I presented to council last time we met, and I thought it was very understanding. We're waiting to hear back from the police union. That would involve, for the police union, it would involve a 48-hour furlough for all commissioned staff. That includes our police officers. The 56-hour applies to our non-represented folks there, which there's only 4, Chris? Trying to, 1, 2, 4 is non-represented, yes. Okay. In our fire department, we've asked for the concession of a 0% COLA for this year. So what we were trying to do was really balance out the budget savings. It just looks different depending on the union group. Service changes. So to date, canceled all special events, recreational programming. I did put through phase 3, although we do anticipate that for the entire rest of the year. Suspension of our rental facilities, of course, closure of Bakerview Park to vehicles, North Edgewater Park, the Eaglemont Beaver Pond Shelter. We intend to close the Division Street Pocket Park as well, and the Kiwanis Spray Park is closed. Delay the construction of the South 25th Street Park, our closure of the library to the general public until we move to phase 2 for drive-up service. Our city offices, of course, are closed, but they're still functioning, eliminating that discretionary spending, and we frozen positions. This is that slide we looked at earlier. Again, all of this is just, it's really screenshots of the memo that's a hard copy that's in your council drive, and I sent you a link to that. And you can get hard copies if you'd like, but to date, this is the plan of the savings with the cuts we've already talked about in detail. Looked at that a little bit earlier, so I can skip over that. The CARES funding, talked about that a little bit. Just wanted to say that once we've been received, we can present budget amendments after discussion with City Council on how we would want to budget that. Again, knowing that as different funding comes in, that we could change and move things around. Remembering that the CARES funding does have some specific usage. We can't just simply put it in for operations. It has to have the specific uses according to the law. And then the GEMT, of course, that's can be used for whatever. It's a total of $897,000. We haven't received those funds yet either, but that can certainly be allocated on whole into the general fund or for use in other ways, as we've talked about earlier. And then other possible financial assistance for the shortfall, we talked about this already too. So whether it's federal, state, flexibility, other grants that we've already applied to, any type of interfund loans, any bank capacity, or of course, the fund balance. So that was just the information that I had to date. Any other questions? Okay. We will definitely keep council informed as to whether we will be able to meet in person on and have a committee meeting next Wednesday. If council wants to have a virtual committee meeting, we could do that. Although we'd have to keep it according to the guidelines of the governor of what's pertinent. We could certainly talk about GEMT funding or something like that, if you would like. If we are able to have an in-person public safety committee meeting, we would definitely have that an agenda item like we've had, where it's for the good of the order, the discussion around the effects of the COVID pandemic too during that. I don't know if that is that clear as mud for what we could be doing next Wednesday. Okay. Did council want to go back to agenda item? No, I had to move because my computer wasn't working that great. Agenda item.
Mayor, this is Richard. I'd like to make a motion that we approve Resolution 975 to ratify Executive Order 2020-007 and authorize the mayor to enter into a professional services agreement with Community Action. That's the $30,000 for hotel vouchers. And that's providing support to our embedded social worker with the police department to help address the emergency issues of housing that we talked about several times tonight. So I do recognize Councilor Holst's concerns, but this is something we've talked about quite a bit. It's a very, very, very small piece of the overall discussion we're having, and it is an emergency response. So I'm fairly comfortable with that. I do want to note for the record that I'm the chair of the board of directors of Community Action, but I serve as a volunteer, so there's no financial connection.
I would second that.
Okay, so there's a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All right, all those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you. I will let you know when we actually enter into that or begin providing that service. It may be another week or till we figure it out for sure, but I'll let you know for sure when that takes place. We're also hoping that the county funding would kick in and that this would be a stopgap measure to just provide some shelter for those folks until the other funding can come online and it can be taken over by Skagit County, because I know they're talking about it as well. So, okay, that completes our agenda items. Kevin, is there a need for an executive session this evening?
No, there's not.
With that, then we'll be adjourned at 9:19. Thank you all.